When the lawyer began reading Grandpa's will, the room went dead silent, except for his voice, smooth and steady but heavy with tension. I was already nervous, clutching my purse tight, because I knew everyone was expecting the usual split. The apartments, the stocks, in the desert land divided equally among the family. But then he said it clearly. The desert land was left entirely to me. Not a share, the whole property. You should have seen my mother's face. Her perfect calm cracked for a second, eyes wide, hand gripping the armrest like she was trying to stop herself from gasping. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Lucas just sneered, as if this was some joke he was about to fix. But it wasn't. Lucas didn't waste a second. He slammed down a heavy leather-bound folder onto the polished table. The sharp noise cut through the room, making heads turn. "Emma, let's be honest here," he said, voice low but cruel. "This land's worthless. I had a local appraiser check it out. This desert, it's nothing but dust and weeds." He flipped the folder open with a cruel grin, showing off glossy pages of a report filled with numbers and charts that claimed the land was practically valueless. I could see the smug look on his face as he slid the folder toward me, like he was daring me to fight it. At that moment, cousins sitting nearby exchanged quick, knowing glances. I caught one whisper to another about filing a lawsuit, another mentioning how they could influence the land registry to keep control. I wasn't imagining it. Their words were sharp and calculated. Later, I found out Lucas had been texting family members about a contact at the local registry office, discussing ways to adjust ownership records and drag things out, with legal delays. It felt like the whole family had turned into a corporate gang, ready to crush me because I was the underdog, the graphic designer with no big business connections or fancy title. Lucas, on the other hand, had a reputation for ruthless deals. I heard rumors at family gatherings, whispers about shady contracts and corners cut, things no one said aloud in front of him but that everyone knew. When I confronted Lucas once, he just smirked and handed me a cheap souvenir rock from the desert at a party, saying, "Here's your fortune, Emma." The sting wasn't just in his words, but in how the room went quiet, everyone watching me like I was the joke. At home, things were worse. Mom was constantly on the phone, speaking urgently with voices I couldn't hear. But once I caught her saying, "Lucas is furious, damage control, family reputation." Dad barely met my eyes, probably knowing this was about to destroy us. Family dinners, once warm with laughter and small talk, became battlegrounds filled with cold looks and snide remarks. Lucas would make comments about how the land wouldn't be mine for long, trying to shake my confidence. One night, after a tense dinner, he cornered me and said, "You're wasting Grandpa's legacy," his tone sharp enough to cut through steel. But despite all this, I found something unexpected. Grandpa had trusted me, the one they all dismissed, with something that wasn't just dirt. I went out to that desert land, stood beneath the endless sky, and felt something real, freedom and a chance to prove them all wrong. Moving to Red Rock felt like stepping into another world. The day I arrived, the bus dropped me on a cracked, dusty road where heat radiated off the pavement so fiercely, I could feel it through my shoes. My phone lost signal as soon as I left the station, and the silence was so thick it made the wind sound deafening. I remember sitting on the creaky porch of the small rental house, the paint peeling and the wood warped from sun exposure. That night the desert air was so dry it scratched my throat, and the only light came from a weak street lamp flickering down the block. It was a harsh contrast to the bustling city life I left behind, where neon signs buzzed and the streets never really slept. I felt utterly alone, like I'd been swallowed by a place that didn't want me. The first person who broke through that isolation was Dr. Samira Khan. I met her at the only grocery store, a tiny place where locals gathered around the counter swapping stories and gossip. She was stacking cans and wore a baseball cap pulled low, eyes sharp but guarded when she noticed me lingering near the organic section, clearly out of place. When I asked about the desert restoration project she led, she hesitated, then began explaining how invasive species and past mining had devastated the soil. Her knowledge was deep, but she was skeptical of my intentions. She said she'd seen many outsiders come and go, more interested in the land's value than its survival. After a few visits, she started inviting me to town meetings and even showed me rare desert plants she was trying to reintroduce. One evening, she handed me a worn notebook filled with her field notes and pictures of baby cacti struggling to grow. That moment made me realize she wasn't just a scientist, she was someone who cared deeply about this land, and somehow she believed in me enough to share her work. Then there was Mr. Willis, the elderly antique shop owner, whose store smelled of old wood and faded memories. When I wandered in, he greeted me like an old friend, even though we'd never met. His walls were covered in sepia-toned photos, some showing my grandfather standing proudly beside rusty mining equipment. He told me stories, how Grandpa had once rescued him during a flash flood, and how they'd spent hours discussing the future of Red Rock over strong coffee. One afternoon, while sorting through a dusty trunk, he handed me a fragile envelope filled with Grandpa's handwritten journals. I remember flipping through pages with faded ink, maps detailing underground water veins, and blueprints for a solar irrigation system Grandpa designed but never built. These weren't just sketches, they were plans fueled by a man's love for the desert and a hope that someday someone would carry on his work. Determined to uncover more, I explored the land myself, following Grandpa's maps to an old shed. Its rotting floorboards creaked underfoot as I carefully lifted a loose panel to reveal a hidden cellar beneath. Inside, dusty crates held journals, tools, and strange symbols etched into metal plates. The biggest shock came when I found a marked shaft nearby, an abandoned mine entrance locals warned me to avoid. They told stories of ghost miners who haunted the tunnels and how several had vanished after the ground gave way. Ignoring their warnings, I ventured close to the shaft, and suddenly, the earth beneath me cracked, sending a cloud of dust into the air. I barely scrambled back to safety, heart pounding, shaken by how real the danger was. It wasn't a myth, sinkholes and unstable tunnels were part of this land's dark history, something Grandpa had known and carefully mapped. Each day in Red Rock peeled back another layer of mystery. The harsh environment, the wary locals, and Grandpa's hidden legacy made me realize this was far more than an inheritance. It was a living story, full of risk, hope, and unexpected friendships, and I was now a part of it. Lucas didn't waste any time after the will reading. Almost immediately, things started unraveling in ways I couldn't ignore. One morning, I logged into my bank account to pay a bill and froze when I saw multiple credit cards maxed out, charges for hotels and restaurants in cities I had never visited. I called the bank, heart pounding, only to be told there was a pending investigation due to suspicious activity. They wouldn't say more. A few days later, I tried to withdraw money to fix a broken fence on the property, and my account was frozen entirely. It felt like someone was trying to strangle me financially, and the pattern was too deliberate to be a coincidence. I heard rumors around town, whispered conversations in the diner and hardware store, about how Lucas had friends in high places. At the local land registry, where I went to file documents proving my ownership, I was turned away with vague excuses. One clerk, who used to smile and offer help, suddenly acted cold and refused to process my paperwork, citing missing signatures and administrative delays. Later, a neighbor, who overheard a conversation outside the town hall, told me the clerk had been seen sharing drinks with one of Lucas's associates the night before. It was clear someone was bribed to stall me and tamper with official records. Lucas's attacks didn't stop at legal sabotage. My phone started filling with messages from people claiming to be concerned friends, urging me to see a therapist for emotional instability. At first, I felt confused and hurt, but then I realized these were staged interventions. At a family brunch, so-called close friends cornered me, speaking in hushed tones about how I was fragile and out of control, while their eyes darted nervously to Lucas, who smirked nearby. I overheard one whisper, "She can't handle this responsibility," as if they were rehearsing a script. It stung because I'd never felt more alone. Then came the legal showdown at the town hall. Lucas arrived with a thick stack of papers, a court injunction aiming to block me from entering the land. I could see the smug confidence in his eyes as he spoke, expecting the crowd to side with him. But something unexpected happened. A few townspeople I'd quietly helped over the months stood up one by one. Mrs. Calderon, the diner owner, told the crowd how I had repaired her leaky roof after a storm, free of charge, because I believed in helping the community. Old Mr. Jensen, a rancher, spoke about how I brought supplies to struggling neighbors during a drought. Their voices were steady, filled with genuine respect and support. The room shifted, whispers turned into nods, and murmurs of agreement filled the air. Lucas's smirk faltered as his legal team scrambled to regain control. The townsfolk's support was a powerful blow to his carefully orchestrated plan, but the battle wasn't over. Every day brought new legal motions, new rumors, and new obstacles. Yet, each time I felt cornered, I remembered the desert land's stubborn resilience. It had survived storms, droughts, and neglect. I realized I had to be just as unyielding. This fight was more than just a battle over property. It was about claiming my worth and standing against a family that tried to erase me. The day Dr. Khan and I finally confirmed the aquifer beneath the desert was unforgettable. We had spent hours digging test pits in the blistering heat, our hands cracked and covered in dirt. When the water sample came back from the lab, the purity was undeniable. I remember watching Dr. Khan hold the vial up to the light, her face shifting from skepticism to excitement as she explained it was rare to find such clean groundwater in this region. She showed me detailed graphs and charts, pointing out how this hidden reservoir could support crops through drought seasons, something no one around here had dared to dream about. Going back to Grandpa's journals, the proof was right there in his own words and drawings. The fragile yellowed pages contained hand-drawn maps of underground water veins, and in the margins, his notes described seeds he'd gathered. Hardy, drought-resistant plants he experimented with himself. One entry detailed a solar-powered irrigation system he designed, with sketches of panels angled perfectly to catch the sun and pump water efficiently. I tested one of his prototype water pumps that he left behind, before it was sabotaged. I found it buried and ripped apart in a shallow trench. The vital parts, like the control unit and solar cells, were missing. It was clear someone had deliberately destroyed it to halt progress. Hank, the local mechanic with grease under his nails and a suspicious squint, initially refused to fix it unless I could pay up front. I was nearly broke, and he knew it. So I organized a small fundraiser in the town hall, selling baked goods and handmade crafts, with neighbors coming out despite the heat and skepticism. I remember Mrs. Torres, an elderly woman who barely had 2 coins to her name, insisting on donating anyway, telling me, "This land deserves a chance." That event caught the eye of a journalist from the county paper, who wrote a feature story about my efforts. Suddenly, people from nearby towns and even strangers online sent donations and messages of support. That article was proof that this wasn't just my fight, it was becoming a community cause. But the battles didn't stop there. Permits were delayed repeatedly with excuses that felt suspiciously convenient. One time, I sat in a stuffy government office for hours only to be told my application was missing a signature. The official seemed uninterested in helping, and when I pressed, a whispered phone call later, I learned through a local friend that a corporate-backed competitor was influencing the delays. It was more than just paperwork. It was sabotage masked as bureaucracy. Still, every time I walked the land, I saw signs Grandpa's vision wasn't dead. Wildflowers stubbornly pushed through cracked soil, and small animals scurried around, signs of life returning. Fixing broken solar panels, piecing together Grandpa's blueprints, and rallying support felt overwhelming, but these tangible moments, the clear water, the journals, the community rallying around me, proved this was real. The desert wasn't just empty dirt, it was a sleeping giant, waiting for someone to wake it up. When TerraCore first made their offer, I remember how carefully I read through the contract. They promised investment and jobs for the town, but when I reached the section about exclusive drilling rights, my heart sank. One clause spelled out that any residents standing in the way could be evicted, families like the Millers, who had ranches there for decades. I thought about Mrs. Miller, who once invited me in for lemonade and shared stories about her father settling this land. How could I sign away her home? Refusing felt like the only choice. Not long after, things started getting strange. I noticed a silver sedan parked near my rental that wasn't there before. It was always there when I left for my morning walk, and when I returned, late at night. One night I caught a glimpse of a man in a dark jacket watching from across the street. When I stepped outside to confront him, he slipped into an alley, disappearing too fast to catch. I later learned from a local that TerraCore hired private investigators to tail me, tracking meetings with Dr. Khan and local council members. It wasn't paranoia, the evidence was everywhere. The intimidation extended beyond me. Mr. Jensen, who had been one of the first to welcome me and even helped repair my fence, showed up one afternoon with a bruised face. He told me his truck had accidentally slipped off a narrow road, but the dents and scratches told a different story. Days before, his phone had been flooded with threatening messages, telling him to drop his support for my project. His wife broke down when she confided in me, afraid for their safety. It became clear TerraCore wasn't just trying to scare me, they wanted to silence anyone standing with me. Then there were the smear campaigns in local newspapers. I still remember picking up the community paper at the corner store and reading headlines accusing my project of damaging the fragile desert ecosystem. One article quoted an anonymous expert, claiming my irrigation plans would drain the aquifer and ruin wildlife habitats. The timing was cruel, published right before town hall meetings and permit hearings. Friends stopped returning my calls, unsure what to believe, and I could feel my reputation slipping through my fingers. The deepest cut came from family. One afternoon, I was walking past the old hardware store and saw my cousin slipping into the back with a suited man I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me. I hid behind crates and watched as they exchanged papers and whispered. I snapped photos on my phone, capturing their secret meeting. Later, I confronted Lucas, hoping for an explanation. Instead, he just laughed, telling me I was a fool and that he was only looking out for the family's best interests. That moment shattered any hope I had of family support. A few nights later, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a chilling note. Stay away, or else. No signature. No name. The threat was clear, and I knew TerraCore's tactics had escalated. Despite the fear, every one of these moments, tailing cars, bruised neighbors, slanderous articles, family betrayals, and threatening notes, proved this wasn't just a fight over land. It was a battle for the future of this community and everything my grandfather dreamed of. I couldn't walk away now. I still remember the day I walked into that courthouse. My palms were sweating, but my jaw was set like stone. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about fighting for every person in Red Rock who believed in something better. My lawyer, Marisol, leaned over and whispered, "We've got them." And we did. The trial was tense from the start. TerraCore's legal team tried to flood the room with technical jargon, dodging every question. But then we brought in the environmental reports, detailed readings showing how their exploratory drills had contaminated the lower aquifer, something they had buried in internal emails we'd subpoenaed. When we projected one of those emails onto the courtroom screen, one where an exec joked about squeezing the desert dry before that girl figures it out, there was a hush, then a wave of angry murmurs from the spectators. Dr. Khan's testimony changed everything. He explained in plain, precise words how the aquifer could support decades of sustainable agriculture if protected and managed right. He showed satellite images, layered with water table data, explaining how TerraCore's drilling would collapse the entire ecosystem. People in the audience who doubted us actually started nodding along. And then came Mrs. Miller, cane in hand, who took the stand and told the court, "Emma patched my roof in the middle of a rainstorm when no one else would. I trust her with my land more than I'd trust any man in a suit." The judge had to pause for a moment when the room erupted in applause. We also had the documents, the ones showing how Lucas had funneled money from the estate into a fake consulting firm, and the screenshots of his messages arranging bribes with that land registry official. When he was called to testify, he tried to play innocent, but he crumbled under cross-examination. You could see the sweat on his brow from the back row. I didn't take joy in it. I just felt tired, sad. A part of me still hoped he'd come around. He didn't. He left town not long after the trial, and no one's heard from him since. A few other family members, Aunt Regina, and even my older cousin Mark, came up to me after the verdict. They said they were sorry. Regina hugged me like she hadn't in years, crying, saying she was wrong and that Grandpa would be proud of me. I don't know if I forgave them, but I thanked them for finally telling the truth. After the dust settled, we launched the project, The first solar panels went up near the West Ridge. Local teens who used to loiter at the gas station now had jobs installing hardware and learning about solar tech. The Eco Farm greenhouse, built on the spot where Grandpa's barn once stood, became the heart of the new Red Rock. We even got a government grant to expand. One morning, I stepped outside and saw a school group touring the place, and I couldn't help but smile. That night, under the golden glow of solar lanterns, we held a community celebration. There was food, music, even a little dancing. I gave a speech, voice shaking but steady enough to say, "This land stands because we stood together." Khan stood beside me, his hand brushing mine. We didn't say anything, but that was enough. Of course I know the threats aren't gone. I've heard whispers that TerraCore's just regrouping. But now, I'm not afraid. We've made something real here, something worth fighting for.